out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to the 87th edition of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast, recorded here in central London, just off historic Abbey Road. We are talking about classic rock, prog rock, hard rock, heavy metal, early MTV, and everything that turned us on back in the day. And I got to tell you, this may be the proudest moment for me and Jackson since we started this almost 2 years ago, is to finally have a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on our show. Really kind of just started off as two old friends talking about music during the pandemic, because it's not like we go out and see it. We're thousands and thousands of miles away from each other. So we started having conversation. I said, you know what, let's record these. We'll make a show out of it. It'll be fun. It'll give you something to do during these days when you're basically just locked inside a flat all day long. And we started to pick up some momentum, make some friends, do some fun interviews. And now, today, after years of working on our craft and gaining knowledge about music that we love, being turned on to some new things and exploring that, we finally get to have a guest on from a band that we loved growing up. Not the first time we've had a great guest on. We've had Jeff Downs of Yes and Asia on. We've had Deborah Bonham and Peter Bullock on to talk about their new album. We had Carl Palmer of Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Asia on as well. Had Chris Slade on to talk about all his great work over the years in AC/DC and The Firm and Manfred Mann and Tom Jones. And I'm probably leaving some folks out, and I don't want to offend anybody, so I'm sorry about that. But one of the first shows we did, shows 5 and 6, were on the legendary guitar player Steve Hackett. Steve, who was a Genesis from 1971 to 77, and then has had a prolific solo career over the last 45 years, talking more than 30 solo albums, and lots of great live albums and DVDs, especially over the last 15 years. Ever since he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he's basically been touring nonstop, and it really hasn't been any different here, except for COVID. And then once COVID was over, he had makeup dates to do, and then he had new dates to do. So once everyone let him out after COVID, he has been running around all over the world like a madman to deliver this classic music to you. And I really got turned on to Steve about 7 years ago. There's a documentary, Some of the Parts, I think it was a BBC doc, but it aired on Showtime or something like that in America, and really delved into the rich history of Genesis from inception, from guys at a posh private school, deciding not to go to college, we'll kind of continue to do this band. Then eventually they ditch some of their buddies. They pick up a couple of pros named Phil Collins and Steve Hackett, and then they go into this really rich time of amazing progressive rock exploration that a lot of people hail as the greatest version of Genesis ever. Despite that the three of them had huge commercial success in the late 70s and early 80s once Peter and Steve left, most people tell you, that's fine, that's cute, I'm glad the housewives like that stuff. But the stuff they did with Steve Hackett is monumental. It's epic. It's amazing. It's the foundation for everything they would do later. And Steve is really the one carrying it forward to this day. I mean, Genesis just wrapped their last tour, their second in 30 years, and they do some of the old stuff from the 70s, but they have to do a lot of their 80s pop stuff, whereas Steve has been honoring this and revisiting a lot of these classic records over the years. And this September, he has a couple really exciting things happening, okay? September 2nd, he has Genesis Revisited live, Seconds Out plus more, including some solo stuff. That's a double CD, a 4LP, a DVD. It's a lot of different versions, and you can pick it up at hackettsongs.com. Go ahead and pre-order that or order it now. But he's been really keeping this music alive, and there's an appetite for it. And not to denigrate anyone else, but I did see Genesis' second to last show in the O2 here this past March, and I've seen Steve Hackett live, and especially when you consider bang for your buck, seeing Steve and his band do these songs is special. And if that's what you want to see, you've got no better deal than to see him and his band do it live. And you've got that opportunity because, like I said, he doesn't stop. He's still on tour wrapping up some Seconds Out stuff. And on September 9th, he's going to do Foxtrot at 50, where he's going to do Foxtrot in its entirety, plus some old Genesis classics, plus more from his incredible solo catalog. So we're going to go ahead and talk with him a little bit about that here. Now, on to some business. Of course, we are a part of the Pantheon podcast family of podcasts, music podcasts covering all genres, and many generations. There's something on there for everyone. We always shout out to our friends who we've talked with before, like Paul from Vintage Rock Pod and This Day Rocks, like Jay from The Hook Rocks, and like Tom and Zeus from Shout It Out Loudcast. And there's some really neat stuff coming from Pantheon soon we want to talk to you about. But we also want to talk about our sponsor, rarevinyl.com. If you are a record collector the way I am, whether it's LPs, CDs, singles, 78s, and it really doesn't matter the genre, they've got it all. Go to rarevinyl.com or EIL.com and check out what they've got. Over 250,000 different pieces, all of it in great shape, curated, their amazing team, and they ship all over the world. And if you use the code PODCAST when you make an order, you'll save 10% off your order, which always helps with shipping and handling and things like that. I recently ordered some great stuff from them. I can't wait to see that here soon. So definitely check out rarevinyl.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring us. If you want some old pristine Genesis or Steve Hackett records or CDs, go to rarevinyl.com. Use the podcast code. They'll get it to you quickly and in great condition. So back to Steve Hackett. Yes, just a master of the guitar, someone who is never stopped making music, an amazing talent, and a good guy. I mean, look, we're going to catch him after a 30-hour trip to get from the Far East back to his home of England. You know, good luck finding me in a good mood after a couple of days like that. But here he is, talking about the tour, talking about his process, talking about what he has coming up and why he's excited about it, you know. So super guy. We're going to have a little preamble with me and Jackson talking a little bit before he came on because, well, as you can imagine, we're really excited. Someone who, after we did our 5th and 6th shows, said, wouldn't it be great to get Steve on here one day? Well, a year and a half later, here we are. Very excited about it, and hopefully you'll enjoy it as well. So a little bit of preamble for us, then we get into it with Steve. So for your listening pleasure, here we are with legendary guitar player of Genesis and member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Steve Hackett, right here on The Wolf. So this is a pretty cool day, Jackson, in that, you know, when we started the podcast, call it a year and a half or so ago, we kind of envisioned it as we're going to compare, you know, UK and US success of different artists and try to figure out why some people make it big in one place and maybe not in the other. And obviously, as people who grew up on classic rock radio in America and MTV, Steve Hackett is underserved. We didn't know him very well. But obviously part of it, at least growing up, we did not. We were not privy to we were just not exposed to his music very much. I would say really not at all. And, you know, part of the excuse was, well, this is an excuse for me and Jackson to just kind of hang out and talk about stuff that we like, you know. But it was me saying, look, Jackson, I've discovered this guy, Steve Hackett, that, you know, we didn't know in college. It was just one of those times where it's like, I found this great artist. I need the world to know about it, but I really kind of needed you to know about it as much as I wanted the world to know about it, you know?
Right. Well, and it was the thing too, where you say, oh, Genesis. Oh no, I know Genesis. No, you really don't. You know the early 80s pop stuff, but you don't know the real meat and potatoes prog stuff that, you know, from the 70s, the Steve Hackett years. So you're right. You know, you turned me on to this, and it was just like a whole new world opening up. Like, how did I miss this, but how did this escape me for so long? And to your point about the, you know, why is one thing bigger in the UK than in the US? It's just really dense, and you just need to get into it and really have an appreciation for the complex songs, the composition, and the musicianship of everyone in the band.
Absolutely true. Yeah. Obviously, when we first got into music, MTV is where we got most of it, right?
Right.
And so we saw his old band without him on MTV some, but really the only chance we would have had to see him was in GTR with Steve Howe, maybe doing When the Heart Rules the Mind, because that was a bit of a hit and a cool video, and they definitely put some money into that. But then because I think of management issues, the band didn't really continue on. And so when all you hear is classic rock, which is very controlled, especially now, by corporations, DJs don't, even in the 80s, they get to choose what they wanted to play a little bit, but they weren't going to go
play Supper's Ready for 23 and a half minutes, right? You say,
Correct.
oh, you want to play Genesis? Play Follow You, Follow Me. The girls like that one, So,
right. Yeah.
So I just feel like we were deprived. And then once I found it, I was like, I got to tell the world about this. People got to know, people got to understand. It's not just Genesis. I mean, when you get into Spectral Mornings and Voyage of the Acolyte and Highly Strung and his solo work, it was fantastic, and collaborating with some great people like Richie Havens. And obviously he got some of his old band members on his solo records. I'm like, this guy's great. Why? What is it about America that can't embrace it? Is it because he's not the lead singer? Is that what it is?
I think so. I think in our discussions about Jeff Beck, I think that is the problem in America. If you are not, no matter how great of a guitar player you are, if you are not out in front, with the exception of maybe Jimmy Page, you don't get the same kind of attention and accolades that you do in other places.
No, that's true. And or you've got to have the consistent lead singer, right? Like Eddie Van Halen had Dave, Annie had Sammy, but he's great. Eric Clapton sings his own stuff. Yes, Jimmy kind of consistently had, certainly in the 60s and 70s, he had Robert Plant, kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, it's like Peter Gabriel's solo was big. Phil Collins' solo was big in America. Genesis, when there were three, were big. But it was like, because he didn't have a distinct singer, and he may have changed singers over the years, and he was not that singer, I don't know. I just feel like it was his A&R people, or it was the record company, or it was American radio. Let him down, but ultimately let us down and a lot of other rock fans, because I know a lot about rock and roll music. So do you. And when I discovered him, like, I know Jackson doesn't know anything about him. There must be more in America who need to know the greatness of this man.
Well, and it kind of stinks because we missed out on it for a while, but then it's also kind of, it's fantastic because it's like a new thing to experience. And that was my problem in kind of in the high school and then going into college years with the stuff that I had listened to. You had listened to it a million times, and you kind of get to the point where you're like, well, we talked about Led Zeppelin 4. Can I listen to this another time? So to get something new, to open this box full of new material to look into is incredible. And to be at a point in my life now where I can really appreciate that and dig into it is great also.
Well, and the other great part is he's still going, and he's still making all sorts of new music and a lot of live albums and DVDs and things like that. I mean, sometimes you'll get into an artist, like I kind of got into Nick Drake for a while there a few years ago. Well, Nick Drake's been gone a long time. There isn't any new Nick Drake coming out. I'm not going to get to see him live, and that happens sometimes.
Okay, that concludes our preamble leading up to our interview with Steve Hackett. Now we're going to jump into our time with Steve. Before we do so, I just want to give another prop to our sponsor, rarevinyl.com. If you're looking for your hard-to-find and rare edition or just pristine condition old LPs, old singles, go to rarevinyl.com, use the code podcast, and get 10% off your order. So if you're looking for a pristine copy of Foxtrot by Genesis or Selling England by the Pound or any of Steve Hackett's classic records, whether it be Spectral Mornings or Highly Strung, or even the new DVDs and CDs, the live album coming out here September 2nd. Go to rarevinyl.com, use the code podcast, and get 10% off your order. Now, on to our time with Steve.
Hello.
There he is.
Hello, Steve.
Yes, I. How are you doing?
Good morning. Or good afternoon.
Good evening, wherever we are in the world.
Yes. And you've been all over the world here recently, sir. You're not letting any moss grow under your feet.
I know. It's been crazy. So, yeah, we got back yesterday after a 30-hour journey. One of those crazy things. The body gives up telling you it's tired. It's a very strange thing. I could just pass out, of course, any time.
Well, we appreciate you coming on. That's for sure.
All right. Pleasure.
Hopefully we won't bore you.
Oh, no, you won't. No, you won't bore us. You won't be doing that.
All right. Well, let's jump in because we could ask you 4 hours worth of questions, but I know you don't have that much time. So you've been doing the Second Out tour for over a year now. Of course, it was delayed, like so many other tours were delayed due to COVID.
Yes.
But you've had huge success. I mean, 4 continents, 5 continents, maybe 6.
It's been nuts, isn't it? Yeah, really since last autumn we've been doing it. So it is nearly a year. Haven't had any time to record for a year, which is crazy, not in a proper studio. Do you know what I mean? So that aspect is very odd, compressing all those shows, all those obligations that have suddenly happened in one time frame. So we've just been through the busiest section, which was crazy. So in the past few days, I've been in New Zealand, Australia, Borneo, and Japan, and now back in the UK. So that has been kind of nuts. I've got a nuts life, but I've spent most of the day playing guitar just to remind myself, that I'm what I do on planet Earth. You know what I mean? Because I get very spaced out with all this. Believe me, it's very, very odd keeping the planes flying when they let you get on them.
Well, of course, yeah. That's been the big question over the last couple of years here, and
That's
obviously,
right, yeah.
Yeah, and you've had to delay it, but then you want to make up those shows, and even later this year, you've got to make up, I think, shows in North America for Seconds Out.
Yes,
well, after Foxtrot starts.
That's right, yeah. Even that, because somebody caught COVID in the team, and so suddenly those things were delayed. So we're doing lots of different sets in different parts of the world. Some of it is selling England by the pound. Some of it, unfulfilled selling England things. Other things have been Seconds Out. There's been solo stuff from Surrender of Silence. There's been some other things from Spectral Mornings. And later in the year, we get to do Foxtrot. So I recognize that. Yeah, back to Foxtrot, which is a mere 50 years old. It's amazing. This very year. So it's extraordinary, isn't it, that people still want to hear stuff that was 50 years old. But Beethoven probably didn't complain. So
that's right.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you is in looking at your schedule, you've got a show on August 21st in Hungary to do Seconds Out. And then on 9/9, you're in the UK to do Foxtrot. That seems like a lot of material to switch back and forth between. How do you kind of keep everything straight and keep the band tight and everything?
Well, I think at the drop of a hat, there's a thing called sound check, which ends up being rehearsal. Brush up on certain things. In fact, in Hungary, I'll be doing stuff with Jarby, so it won't be the Genesis stuff. Although there might be some Genesis numbers in there. They tend to throw in a few with their own arrangement of those things. But 90% of that is improvised stuff, as is the way with Jarby, and that's a lot of fun. That's right off the map. It's nice to sort of tear up the equivalent of the score sheet and say, this is all about solo. So I do very quick albums with them. Sometimes, we get an album done in an afternoon. It's an extraordinary thing.
Amazing.
And I keep thinking they're going to say to me, solo, stop, do another one. You can get that better. But it's not like, no, just keep going. Do another one, do another one, do another one, another song. So
sure.
It's sort of jazz sensibility. It's very different from the through composed, thoroughly disciplined world of Genesis.
Well, but you complain, hey, I haven't really been able to go into a studio for a while, but during lockdown, you put out two great records, one, Surrender of Silence. Yes, and this one that we love very much on this show, Under a Mediterranean Sky.
Yeah, Under a Mediterranean Sky was a virtual journey because nobody could leave home at that time. And suddenly I thought, well, how do I take people places, or how do I appear in front of them? So we did an album that was the equivalent of a travelogue in a way. The idea of acoustic pieces that all had a flavor of individual places around the Mediterranean. So one or two Italian-based things, some Scarlatti, some Greek influenced stuff, some Spanish influenced stuff. It's the nearest thing to a classical album or a soundtrack or a travelogue, depending on what your descriptions are. But it's whatever it is, it's not rock and roll. Whereas Surrender of Silence is rock and roll,
for sure.
But it's a little bit like orchestral heavy metal, really. There's a lot of orchestra on it, and there's a lot of metallic stuff on that. That's a rock album. At least I think it's a rock album. I don't know. My description's probably Trade Descriptions Act, falsifying genres
of rock and roll records.
So when you were doing Mediterranean Sky, and this is something that it really interests me as far as like artists and how they create. Did you set out to make an album or were you there and it inspired you to do that?
I tell you what happened. We were halfway through an American tour. The world closed down. Nobody could tour anywhere. We got the last flight back from Philadelphia, or else I would have been stuck there for months. And
Right.
lovely though Philadelphia is, and great friends there. But the idea was, how do you play in front of people? How do you keep it honest? I couldn't access the band. I couldn't do that. So I thought, once again, rely on your own fingers rather than farming it out. So that was the kind of work that I could do mainly on my own. Yes, sure, there was orchestral stuff. We had other players. We had samples. We mixed it all up. And it was a joy to do. It was good for the soul to do that. Then we took off a week or two and got straight away on with Surrender of Silence, a very different album. Of course, yes, I could have released them as a double, and they would be very different types of music. But it's somewhat schizophrenic, isn't it? Really, the acoustic stuff I do isn't just the electric stuff, but done with acoustic instruments. It's very different. It's very different music. It's very romantic, but you get to use the influence of places. Egypt, for instance. Now, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what was the title of the Egyptian sounding track, but I think it might be track number 3, which I was thinking of making number 1, but we made them all to number 1.
Is that Sirocco?
Sirocco, that's right. Yeah. The wind that blows in from North Africa, I believe. And of course, we had been in Egypt. My wife Jo and I, we'd done a trip up the Nile. That trip of a lifetime on a boat, leisurely, looking at the sights, absolutely wonderful. And of course, whenever I'm in Egypt, the notebook is out, and it's like the walls, the paintings, the sculptures. It all screams music. It's like an amplifier, and so much of it is pristine. The sandstone has been toughened by wind and rain, unlike the limestone that gets diminished and crumbles. So this stuff looked like it was just built, and none more exotic than all of that. So, and I'd also visited Lawrence of Arabia's place in T.E. Lawrence in Wadi Rum, which was the Jordanian side of the desert. Seen the actual house, which is basically in ruins now. But we spent a night under the stars with the Bedouin people, and that was absolutely lovely. And of course, it's another side of it. So the desert is wonderful. The Nile is wonderful. You can't comprehend all of it. You can't be everywhere, but we sure as hell tried. And so those descriptions came into the music. Sometimes it affects the rock and roll as well. But in general, when I think of Middle Eastern stuff, I usually think of acoustic music, and occasionally it strays into rock stuff.
Interesting. I want to talk to you a little bit about a place you visited earlier this spring, and that's Poland.
Yes.
Because someone who I believe Amanda Layman, has been on her show a couple times, and
yes.
I had to reach out to her to say, are Steve and Joe okay there? Because the war in Ukraine had just broken out, and they did have folks displaced in Poland at that time.
Yes.
And I was like, what was it like being there? Was there a heightened sense of awareness? Were the streets busy or quiet, or what was going on?
Well, there was, and our promoter was saying, he'd been helping refugees. He said the trains are just full of women and children, and we've all seen the pictures. And there was an idea of, we had a spare vehicle, and we were going to try and get people to the UK, but unfortunately, the UK has had such a draconian system of not actually letting in refugees, whatever they say, whatever the spin is. The truth is that if there are refugees, you don't know them personally, and you can't vouch for them. So, you're either opening your homes and hearts or not. And there were so many friends who wanted to do that, and couldn't do that because the government got in the way. But so that's a real shame, because we could have done with the world coming together en masse for that. That conflict is still going on.
Indeed.
But yes, we were, I don't know, arguably an hour away from where that stuff was happening. But that's just what happens on tour. Sometimes you're close to war zones. Sometimes you're close to banditry. Sometimes sometimes not even touring with a band. We were visiting Ethiopia. We went to certain regions that suddenly became no-go areas, and what have you. Say, one of these days you're going to get a ticket to somewhere and suddenly find that, we were in Borneo visiting orangutans and caves and all sorts of stuff. And that was wonderful. But at any moment, that suddenly it could all go crazy. But a lovely place to visit, by the way. Jungle was good.
Yeah, we really appreciate your travel blogs and just kind of the pictures from the road. Definitely a lot of places on my bucket list, especially Japan, but really cool
Yes.
to see the scenery and just experience some of the culture through your travels.
Yes. Well, and part of what we did when it was lockdown was to do lockdown videos as well. So if we couldn't take people places, we could do it with the music. So the music has to suffice at times. You can't take people everywhere. You can do blogs, you can do photos, you can do a representation of a bit like the film with Amelie, the gnome that shows up everywhere. We are those touring gnomes.
Yes.
But it's been a lot of fun.
Well, good. And from what I can see, Steve, from the last 15 or 20 years, you've been very, very productive. New music, lots of touring, lots of wonderful CD and DVD packages and behind the scenes footage of you and Roger in the living room, cutting up, doing this stuff.
Yeah.
It seems to me that not only is your talent and your work ethic the reason why, but it's because of two people in your life, Roger and Joe.
Yes.
What's it like and to have those two on your side, and how do they influence the music that you make?
Well, they're both very different characters. I mean, Joe wants to see the world and she wants the music to tell a story. Joe said to me, the kind of music she likes is anything but casual. She said to me, I'd rather heavy metal, at least it's full of passion, rather than casual. Clever casual bores her to tears.
Okay.
So yes, it can be classical, that can be full of passion. It can be flamenco, that's full of passion. It can be blues, as long as it's really felt and energetic and all the rest. It seems as if the genre is flexible, but the passion has to be there. That's her take on it. Roger, much more of a cerebral take. He's a bit of a contradiction at times. He said to me, I don't really like romantic music. Romantic classical stuff. That's what he said. He said, I prefer either Bach, the Baroque master, or he goes straight to Stravinsky.
Okay.
But in recent times, he decided to start taking piano lessons over again in order to learn how to play Chopin very quietly. And I said, yeah, Chopin, romantic. What's going on there? He said, yes, have to admit it. So I don't know. He must be, he would be mortified if I said he was a closet romantic, but there you are. Closet romantic, very, very dry sense of humor, very accomplished, great player. At times I'll hear him playing a Bach piece absolutely perfectly. And I say to him, yeah, do you want to do that tonight on stage? Do you want to just wander into that? He said, no, there are people around who are far better than me at doing that. Well, do you want to record it? I said to him, and he says, no, there are far better people. So he argues himself out of anything like that. Whereas, as an untrained musician, I will attempt a piece of Bach just because I love it, and I don't care that I'm not John Williams or Segovia or anyone. I do it and get to feel every note. And I'm not interested in being graded by classical experts. That doesn't worry me. You feel it or you don't. That's really it. I don't care that the other people who can, do that for a living.
I think that's really what it is. When you make music and you allow people to feel something when they hear your music, but you are also affected by music too, and just the sheer joy of being able to reproduce it and to play it is something that I think a lot of people, including us, wish we could do. And so to have somebody like you do that and just listen to it it's phenomenal.
Well, I just try and when I do that sort of stuff, just try and make a perfect record. And so the way to do it, so having this conversation with Anthony Phillips, who is known mean guitarist himself and has written some of the most wonderful Genesis stuff before I joined. So my predecessor in Genesis, he says to me, about about the Bach stuff. He said, "Oh, how did you do that?" And I did. Well, we do it in small chunks. Do you know what I mean? And we put it together that way. I'm never going to go out and do an evening of Bach mistakes with Steve Hackett. We just don't want to do it. But to record something, it's a bit like, it's the equivalent of painting, isn't it? It's the Sistine Chapel. It's the work is so valuable. A little bit like Shakespeare, perhaps. Why would an actor want to do Shakespeare or make a film of that? Because it's not going to make money. It's not going to set the world alight. But it's paying homage to something where your version of it is a footnote to what everyone else does. It's a bit like Everest, isn't it? Why climb it? It's because it's there. It's because it's wonderfully detailed. And again, to my mind, it doesn't sound like a surfeit of logic. It sounds like a collection of passionate moments, or at least that's how I see it. We don't really know what Bach was thinking, do we? We don't know. The church never allowed us to find out what he was really thinking. So Roger thinks it's all a cover, all that religious stuff. He thinks that Bach was really closet romantic. Well,
Maybe so.
We'll never know. Fumblings in the organ loft.
Well, I was fortunate enough to catch one of your Palladium shows here on Seconds Out. And great to see Amanda with you. I've got tickets to Hammersmith, but it seems that what I'd really love to see, Steve, is one of your Trading Boundaries shows where you pull out the nylon. I didn't hear about that. I know you did one last year. You have a couple more scheduled for January. Can you tell us about the dynamic of those shows versus like a traditional theater show?
Okay. In general, I haven't been doing many acoustic shows in recent years. I did do previous years where I was doing practically nothing but I didn't want to confuse people. Having sort of convinced promoters that I was good for box office, if you start doing that, there's always the danger that they'll say, yeah, well, actually, we would prefer you to do something rock, prefer you to do something Genesis. Acoustic, yeah, all very nice, but blah, 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 but what puts bums on seats is something else. What you spend doing it in your private hours, and you occasionally release, whether it's something that's acoustic, that's personally written, or it's something that's an homage to a previous model, like going through the Segovia songbook. Those gigs can be very special, and sometimes I'll come off stage having done those acoustic gigs because there is nowhere to hide. And I think that my evening was just full of fumblings and all those things. And then people come up, shake my hand, say, absolutely marvelous, really wonderful. But personally, what you're aiming for is the standard of excellence that you can't reach. Yeah. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we were all superhuman and we all came up with perfection? But acoustic music, if you go at it seriously, try and break some boundaries with it, you will make mistakes. You will stumble and fall. That's just in the nature of it. I mean, I remember seeing John McLaughlin with Shakti years ago. Phenomenal technique, extraordinary stuff. And some friends just saw him recently playing with Gary Husband, who's also phenomenal. And Gary plays keyboards with John McLaughlin and drums with a level 42. How is that possible? I do not know. Talk about supermen and wonderful, and I do admire John's work, particularly with the Los Angeles Guitar Quartet, where John was playing slowly and melodically the work of Bill Evans, jazz, piano, stuff given over to quartet, and John improvising over the top. Very, very beautiful work. Very, very, not really like Pat Metheny, but you can drift off to Pat Metheny as well. This idea of ambient jazz, that's an interesting area. Not too much indulgence, more a case of not exactly music for siesta, but it's the kind of defies description. Does acoustic music have to be fast in order to be impressive, or can it float? Can it afford to do that? So I like to have a fair amount of effect on the guitar, unless we're doing something percussive. And I think it can cast a spell. I think at Trading Boundaries, what's nice is that they've got Buddhas behind you and smoke going on. So there's already an atmosphere of serenity and calm as people are they have a meal and then they get to watch an act, and you might happen to be that act that night. So we do it once a year. We normally do about 2 shows. There might be 3. I don't know. And it's great. Michael Clifford does a wonderful job of making that very, very special. I don't know how he runs that place, but they're also doing a hotel as well. So, you might be able to stay and watch and eat and listen and all that. It's extraordinary stuff.
Hi, I'm Amanda Layman, and you're listening to Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast.
Now, the interesting thing that you said was you were talking about making mistakes, and you're thinking about making mistakes. But you have to realize, like, for the people in the audience, us mere mortals, just to hear you, it's just you're taking us on a ride, and it's great. And even though you think, well, that wasn't exactly right, to hear it, especially played live, there really is nothing like that. And it's just it's the whole journey. And for people for the millions of people out there who either don't play an instrument or play it kind of, on the weekends or at night or whatever, to hear somebody who does that professionally is really, it's phenomenal. And I don't think anybody can tell if you're making mistakes. That's people are just happy to be there.
Oh, one night we were doing, I have to admit to being human, that we did, there's a track I wrote, a sort of commemorative piece when Genesis reformed in 1982 in order to bail out WOMAD and to help with that. And I'd flown 3,000 miles to be there for the gig. And I wrote this piece and I ended up calling it Time Lapse and Trading Boundaries. One night I played it moderately well, and the next night I tried to play it, and I couldn't even remember the opening phrase, and I went at it about 3 or 4 times. I thought, people are probably thinking, what's he doing up there? And maybe it was all in the right key of D, but of course nobody really knows what's going on in the mind of the performer. What are you aiming for, and what do you actually pull off? And so you can't give yourself a hard time. And funny enough, Hugo Dagenhart was there, who's a phenomenal drummer I've worked with in the past. And I said, oh, sorry, it was such a balls up, wasn't it, tonight? He said, oh, no, it seemed like precision stuff to me. So there you are, even in the eyes of the mind, the ears of well-known professionals. Nobody really knows, They're not sitting there with the program going, oh, yes, this is the 3rd movement of the Brandenburg, and it's got to be played just so. It's not that.
Although, when I saw you do Supper's Ready at the Palladium, there were people who knew note for note what was going on there. And this is not a 5-minute pop song. This is a 25-minute epic, right? And they seem to know it backwards and forwards. It was amazing how the fans react with that piece of music.
Yeah. The only time I get really to be spontaneous on that is during the play out. I do something like the established phrases that were done when it was multi-tracked all those years ago, and then go off the plot and step through my noises and toys and all that kind of stuff. And it's surprising how it goes. Some nights it can be really great, and other times I think, I'm just overplaying and it's not really cascading in the right sort of way. But there are times when you just got to go for it and say, well, I'm not going to be reverent at the end. I've done the whole thing as far as it's written. This is it, the Sermon on the Mount. Here comes Supper's Ready. But maybe we get that little bit right at the end, and I can cut loose on that. And it usually ends up with the guitar sounding a bit like Birdsong in the end. I've usually got a backwards effect on it, and with my ring, I'm just circling the strings, and it sounds like tweeting birds, and it becomes another kind of music right at the end. And I'm very happy with that. We learned music from the birds, didn't we? The birds that were once dinosaurs. So it's taking it back to the source in a sense. If I don't sound too pretentious with that. There we go.
Well, I mean, we are always very interested in the creative process and how it works. And one thing that I'm interested in about you is you play the Fernandez guitar. It looks like a Les Paul, but it's not. It's a Fernandez. Yeah. And my question is, I mean, you could have anything that you wanted. You could have any guitar on the face of the earth. Why that one?
Well, the Sustainer facility
was
something that 20 years before that technology was there, I used to dream of a guitar that had an onboard EBO, so that you could have complete sustain, no tyranny of volume, complete accuracy with that. And one of the additions that I asked Fernandez to do was to put a Floyd Rose tremolo arm on as well, so that you had, the ability to be able to not just dive bomb, but be able to bend notes and let them sustain on, and sometimes use the vibrato facility and other things, and police car noises and all that. It's great at those sort of those chases. It's just one of the things you can do with that. But at the moment, I'm between three guitars, electric guitars. One of them is a Les Paul. The other one, the Fernandez that I've been using live, used to belong to Gary Moore, God rest his soul. Wow. We shared the same guitar tech at one point, and when Gary passed on, Graham Lilly said to me, we used to bring this on tour for you as a spare. Are you interested in buying this? And by the way, I've got another one. I thought, you're great, because I don't have enough of these, just in case anything happens to mine. So so I've been playing that, and it sounds great, by the way, when you've got an Engel amp, Marshall speakers, and the Fernandez guitar. Seems to be a really extraordinary combination. When I was just playing in Japan and Australia, we were using, actually, I think it was in Japan specifically, we were using Marshall again, and a different sound, no doubt about it. And I did some work years ago with Brian May, who became a friend, and he and I did a couple of projects together. And just recently, I ended up swapping up another Les Paul with a pal of mine for one of those guitars that Brian and his father designed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I've been recording some stuff with that, and that sounds fabulous. But all of these guitars do something slightly different. There hasn't been a guitar built that does absolutely everything. So I am swapping guitars around when I'm playing live at the moment. Sometimes it's just because there'll be one that's detuned. I used to play one guitar all night with Genesis. That was the Les Paul from 57.
I remember that one. Yeah.
Wonderful guitars we have tried. I got to play Greg Allman's guitar recently, which was the one that he used on Layla. The thing that I believe starts it out is, I believe that's him, but we don't really know. The hallowed halls of privileged guitarists, not all of whom are still with us. And that was a 57 Les Paul, which is remarkably similar to my one. And so I felt like I was playing the same guitar. But yes, of course, they are standard, aren't they? They come off the production line, but they do have a life of their own. So the Les Paul was the go-to guitar for me as a kid. I used to dream of owning that. I used to think anyone who's got a Les Paul and a Marshall has already made it. You've got the paint.
That's true enough.
Now go and do the Mona Lisa. Go and do that. You got the wherewithal to do whatever, and then you spend the rest of your life trying to be worthy of the great instrument. That's what.
Thank you kindly, sir. I know you got to jump to another one. Go get some rest, and we'll see you on the road soon.
Lovely talking to you guys.
Thank you so much.
If I seem a bit spaced and jet lagged, that's because I am. So anyway, great to talk.
You've heard it. Thank Joe and thank Sharon for us.
Will do. Yeah. Thank you. I will thank them all. Lovely ladies. Hi, this is Steve Hackett, and you're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London.
He just came off a 30-hour flight.
Oh, my goodness.
From the Far East.
Wow.
And he jumped on with us to talk a little bit about the upcoming release here. I think that's September 2nd. There's a few different versions of it. It's basically a live account of his Seconds Out tour. There's CD, DVD, CD, Blu-ray. There's a 4 LP version, I think, that's available. And you can pre-order that now. And then, of course, a week after that, the 9th of September, he starts Foxtrot at 50. Just the guy doesn't stop, man.
And I like that comment about how the sound check is the rehearsal. Come on, here we go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is, he's been revisiting a lot of this music for a long time. His band has been pretty tight together. He's had a couple of changes over the years, but he's had a lot of the same folks in the band. So, and he's obviously Supper's Ready was on Seconds Out. So getting ready for Foxtrot, well, that's half of it,
Yeah.
to be honest with you. That's half the record. But to be able to throw in a Horizons, the acoustic bit that he does ahead of Supper's Ready is like the only thing on the second side of Foxtrot that's not Supper's Ready. I'm looking forward to doing that. I didn't realize that Watcher of the Skies, not only was he a co-writer with the other guys in the band, but his brother John Hackett was a co-writer on that as well.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's very interesting. I really wonder how it's one of those things that you could ask 1,000 times. What would have happened had he stayed in the band? What would Genesis have been with him into the 80s? Who knows?
Yeah, but then you also ask, well, would he have done Spectral Mornings if he was
Right.
still in Genesis?
Exactly.
Not getting his ideas across. From what I understand is, and if you look at the video, the documentary, Some of the Parts, which from what I understand, Steve is not a huge fan of, because I think they build it as his contributions outside of the band would have been a bigger part of the story, and then they really kind of cut it down to basically when he was in the band. But in that, he said he basically decided it was a lot easier to negotiate with himself than trying to get up against Tony Banks, who, from what I understand, he's the one who screams the loudest. He's the one who pounds his hand on the tables like, we are doing this. So,
yeah, you're right. It definitely is easier. All in favor. Okay, we're doing this.
Because he stuck around for a couple of albums, Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering, after Pete left, after Peter Gabriel.
Right.
And was obviously on Seconds Out, the live album, which he's been touring on for a year now. So God bless him. He's not stopped since they let him out after COVID. He has not stopped, and he has gone, is it 5 continents? Is it 6? I don't know. It's more than I have done. That's for sure.
It's got to be one of those things where you wake up in the morning, you just, all right, where am I now? And where are we going today? Because I'm starting to lose track. And what time is it?
Yeah. And he just keeps making new stuff. How many artists, we were talking about this the other day, how many artists are happy to cruise on their back catalog? And while, yes, he is celebrating albums that are 45 and 50 years old, he's still putting out a new album every couple of years, if not 2, like he did during the pandemic in a year, So this is someone who's kind of, to me, an open channel. Like it never stops. It's always coming through him in some way. And now he's got a collaborator in Roger and some of the other members of the band to really kind of make it happen.
Yeah. And it was interesting to hear him talk about switching gears and playing different styles of music and not just being locked into one. And I think that, to your point, that really is the dividing line between acts that are nostalgia, like that's all they're going to do is tour on the back catalog, and guys like Steve who are actively making new, they actively have more things that they need to express and are constantly writing new music.
And it's connecting. I think, if I'm not mistaken, last year's UK tour was the biggest tour, most dates he'd ever done in the UK in his life. Maybe not Genesis. I think back in those days, they toured the heck out of him. In fact, from what I could see in researching for the show, he joined in 71. Their first album that he did was Nursery Crime, and Phil Collins' first album with the band as well. And the tour really took it out of him, because this is the first time he's in a pretty big band, and I think the tour really kind of wore him down. He's like, do I even really want to do this anymore? Because that's hard work. I'm not sure that, that I'm a fit. And the guy's like, no, look, we like the way you play. You did great. Please come back. And then it's really Foxtrot, from what I can tell, although we may think that Selling England by the Pound is their best, and a lot of people share that view. Obviously, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is the epic. But Foxtrot is where that classic lineup of Gabriel, Hackett, Rutherford, Banks, and Collins really kind of solidified, and they really started to create their sound. You could hear some of it on Nursery Crime, but Foxtrot was more of the whole package, and obviously Supper's Ready is monstrous. It's epic. It's huge.
Yeah, and I think wasn't Lamb Lies Down, wasn't that all like Peter Gabriel? Like that was his concept.
The story, yes. The concept, and I think all the lyrics, maybe, yes. But he didn't play any guitar on it,
Right. But I think it's different when you've got, this is what I want to do, to kind of getting everybody together and just throwing stuff on the table and seeing what rises to the top.
Very kind of him to take some time when he's exhausted. He has
just a real pro too, not like a, come on, hurry up, let's get this over with. I feel like we could, had he was a little more rested and didn't have another thing to do in 10 minutes,
Right.
we could have spent a lot more time with him.
Well, and that's for sure. I mean, we've got 4 hours worth of questions, and we only had half an hour. Right. But I mean, but even this fall, I mean, look, so he just wrapped up his Far East and Australia tour a little bit, right? But he's still got coming up here very shortly, like next week. He's in Germany and Italy, for like 9 or 10 days. I think he's going to Malta in early August. He mentioned he was going to be playing with Jabe in several places, around in Europe in mid to late August. And then, Foxtrot at 50 starts through September and October here. Then he's got to go back to North America for the Seconds Out dates that he missed, in Canada and in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And then next year, look, he's already starting to book dates. I mean, he's got a tour of continental Europe already booked, doing Foxtrot at 50. Next summer he's going to have more. So, I mean, what is he, 72, 73?
But I mean, obviously a guy he's not ready to just retire and go on, gardening leave. He's still out there, traveling the world. Great to have his wife by his side, who's definitely a force to be reckoned with. And, she said, I want to travel. Okay, let's go. Just, living his best life.
Absolutely. And happy for him, too, because I don't think at 72, maybe I'll be traveling some, but I won't be working the way he is, I don't think.
Well, that's because you don't have a job. And unfortunately, I don't have a job where it was like, I have to do this. He's got these ideas in his head that have to come out. And I think he genuinely enjoys playing live and playing with his band and collaborating with people. Yeah, just a passion that unfortunately most people don't have with their occupation.
Yes. Well, unless we can turn this into our full-time occupation, Jackson.
Well, there we go.
We're working on, and maybe by the time we're 70 to 73, this will be all we do. We interview classic rock people. If we're 72, there's not going to be many of them left around to interview, unfortunately.
I mean, you never know with modern medicine. So you're 128 years old. How is that going?
So, Dave Grohl, you're looking good for 86. Can you hear me okay? What's that say? He's great. And if you've got a chance to see him, I mean, he's not doing too many dates in North America this December and late November, because, again, it's really just about making up dates that he had to cancel for one reason or another last year. I know he's got several in Toronto and one in Montreal and Quebec City, but, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, there's a few places he's going to hit. Definitely go check that out. And obviously, continental Europe. Look, the last date that he has booked is Utrecht, Netherlands, May 8th. I'm hoping he adds Amsterdam, Netherlands, May 9th, maybe May 10th.
Yeah, I would think so. And I would hope, I didn't get to ask him this, but I would hope that there would be another North American leg added on probably to the back more for the Foxtrot, because I think it looks like the ones that he's got now are the Seconds Out makeup shows. Right. So I got my fingers crossed that that's in the cards.
Somehow I'm going to bet that it is. I'm guessing it is. I don't know if that'll be before he does Germany, like maybe he comes back in March or something for that, or would he postpone it till do it in the summer, something like that. I would rather tour Europe in the summer than America. America's just hot, and it can get nasty there in the summer.
Yes.
I'd rather be in America in the spring, but that's just me. It's 80 degrees here in London, and I'm about to melt, which you're like laughing like, it's 80 degrees by the time I wake up. Dude.
Exactly. At 6:30 this morning, it was 80 degrees, but that's okay. We will survive.
Thank you so much for tuning in to our talk with Steve Hackett, the guitar legend who just has so much going on right now. I mean, still wrapping up his Seconds Out tour in Europe, going to be doing some dates with Jabe in Eastern Europe in August, ahead of September 2nd, when the live DVD, CD, LP, however you want to buy it, Seconds Out and More, Revisited, comes out, and you can get that anywhere, including at our sponsors, rarevinyl.com, where if you use the code podcast, you get 10% off your purchases. So go ahead and pre-order that, but you can also get it at hackettsongs.com. And I encourage you to go to hackettsongs.com. It's got Steve's travel blog on there. Obviously, it's got all his tour dates and releases, upcoming shows, and just great videos and pictures and way to interact with him. But it also shows all of his great releases. And just go back and look over the last 12, 15 years, all the great live packages that he's put together from these various tours. Yes, revisiting a lot of Genesis stuff, but also revisiting some of his solo stuff. Like you mentioned, Spectral Mornings and things like that. He's just prolific. He's an open channel. He's one of those guys that something will come to him in a dream, and he'll have to wake up in the middle of the night and play it and try to go lay it down. He just does not stop creating music, and he obviously loves to play live because he has not stopped, for years, and he just kind of keeps going. Foxtrot at 50 tour starts in England September 9th, and I think there's about 25 or so dates there, including one at Hammersmith that I do have tickets for, and I definitely can't wait to see that. So, look, I know a lot of people know who Steve Hackett is. I know a lot of people are old school Genesis fans. I just know that I'm almost 50 years old, and I know a lot about classic rock music. I got thousands of records. I spent countless hours listening to the radio, watching music documentaries, going to live shows, and all that. And until I was about 42 or so, something like that, I didn't really have any concept of who Steve Hackett was. Now, that's kind of my fault, but I really also blame American rock radio, and I blame MTV, and I blame the record companies who say, well, that's just not what we're interested in pushing right now. Because his music is genius, and it covers all sorts of genres. You talk about classical and heavy metal and blues-oriented stuff. I mean, he's got more solo releases than Phil Collins, Peter Gabriel, Tony Banks, and Mike Rutherford put together, okay? He has never stopped. He's just prolific, And you can tell from our interview, he's a genuine guy. He is someone who serves the music, serves the fans very well, and doesn't have any interest in quitting. So if you weren't familiar with Steve, hey, listen to his records. Listen to old Genesis records. Listen to our old shows. Episodes 5 and 6 were in depth all about Steve Hackett. It's really me trying to coach Jackson up on who Steve Hackett is. I think episode number 28 was on Selling England by the Pound. One of our very favorite, or at least most popular episodes, was our review of him live at the Palladium. I think that's about episode number 44 or so from last year. But you can listen to any of that, get a feel for him. Go out and buy the new live album, Seconds Out, live, plus solo stuff, coming out September 2nd. And then if you're in the UK, definitely go see him on Foxtrot at 50 tour. I've got a feeling for our fans in the U.S. that Foxtrot 50 will be coming your way in 2023. We just don't have those dates at this point. So thank you kindly to Steve. Thank you to his wife, Jo, who helped coordinate this, and to Sharon at Publicity Connection for hooking us up. Thank you kindly. It was a great time for us, and I hope Steve enjoyed it as well. Now, as usual, we have to wrap things up, and we want to know, did we get something right? Did we get something wrong? Did we miss the point? Did we leave out your favorite part? What would you have asked Steve Hackett had you had the time with us? Well, let us know. You can tweet or DM us at ugly_werewolf or at actionjack72. You can also email us, uglyamericanwerewolf@gmail.com. Let us know what records, bands, concerts, DVDs, what musical shows you want us to talk about. Thanks again to our sponsor, rarevinyl.com, where you can use the code podcast to get 10% off all of your purchases. And thanks to all of our friends and family members of the Pantheon podcast network of shows, about 100 shows with something for everyone. And there's some really exciting things going on with Pantheon right now that we can't wait to share with you here real soon. So you're going to have to stay tuned for that. Next week, we actually welcome a special guest that some people who listen to our show probably will know. He's Mr. Sonny Hollywood Pooney, who has his own fantastic podcast, Growing Up Rock. And he's been a guest on many, many different podcasts all over the world. And he, on a regular basis, I think on a monthly basis, he does Album Review Crew with the guys, Tom and Zeus from Shout It Out Loudcast. Sonny's a great guy. He's a little bit older than us, but he basically grew up around the same time as we did. And he knows his 80s hard rock better or just as well as anybody out there. He's got the details. He lived through it. He knows his stuff. Super guy. So it was a real fun conversation. We can't wait to share that with you on the show here real soon. So thanks again to Steve Hackett, and to all you rock and rollers all around the world. Be cool and stay safe.